with this that with the clinicians that worked on this, we had clinicians at Harvard as well as Rush University Medical Center really take a look at the nutrients from both the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet that were the most complementary to cognitive function and prevention of cognitive decline. And I want us to go into more detail about that. So first, let's talk a little bit about the brain in general. I think that as an organ, even though we rely on it every single minute, every single second, it's not something that we're always constantly thinking about. We probably don't even necessarily think about it as being a hungry organ, but your brain is one of your body's hungriest organs. It actually uses more energy than any other organ, up to 20% of calories. Again, when I share this with other groups, it can seem a little crazy, like, what, is my brain needing nutrition? And this is really one way that I will validate to students the benefit of having study snacks, especially if their last meal was at 5 o'clock in the sorority house, but then they're doing an all-nighter, trying to study, write a paper, doing all of these things. But then they have this rule in their head that their mother or someone else taught them, oh, you can't eat after 7 p.m. or late night eating is bad. Well, I think that's going to be in relation to what time someone's going to bed. So if somebody is going to be staying up pretty late and they're using all of this brain power to do the things they need to do, that's where we're going to need that nutrition. And so when we think about that preferred energy source for the brain prefers glucose, aka carbohydrates. And so that is going to be coming from the foods that we eat. Yes, our brain can run off of alternative fuels if carbohydrates are not available, but the brain runs at its highest level of efficiency if glucose is actually available. And I don't know about y'all, but I would prefer my brain to be running at its highest level of efficiency and capacity. And the thing also about our brain is that it has some high metabolism. It burns those calories pretty quickly. And because it burns it pretty quickly, it needs to be fed pretty consistently throughout the day. Unfortunately, our brain does not have the biggest snack closet, so to speak, to be able to store food for the day and kind of run off of that all day long. So it's not a situation where we can just have this massive power breakfast and expect that to really get us through the entire day. Basically, our brain is eating up those nutrients and then its lunchbox is empty and it needs to be refilled pretty consistently throughout the day. So I think first we want to start that basis of understanding, hey, our brain needs energy, nutrients, just like the rest of our body. And I think it can be very easy for us to overlook that. Also, too, the thing about our brain is that it is very sensitive to oxidative stress. When we think about what oxidative stress is, I think some of us may be familiar with this concept. And for those of us that may be less familiar, essentially, these are going to be free radicals or unstable molecules that damage our cells. You may hear this whenever we talk about cancer promoting cells, a lot of oxidation or inflammation happening in the body. And what makes the brain particularly sensitive is that oftentimes there's going to be more free radicals in the brain compared to available antioxidants to neutralize them. So that's why the way that we eat is going to be so important for brain health, because our brain is relying on our food and the quality of the food and those foods having antioxidant properties to be able to neutralize that oxidative stress that is happening within the brain. And I'm going to pause for just a second so I can take a look at the chat. Okay, just making sure that I look over there. In case I miss any questions during the chat, please know that towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to make sure we go back through there. I'll have Miranda help me flag some of those questions too, because I don't want to miss those. Okay, so in terms of types of antioxidants, first we're going to have those enzymes that are made by our body. So those are going to be things that already made naturally in our body. But as far as these enzymes go, really the role here is going to be more of a prevention in terms of just preventing toxic substances from being created in the first place. So obviously we want that to happen. But then when we start thinking about antioxidants coming from the nutrients in our food, food, this is going to be those antioxidants that are neutralizing the damaging consequences of oxidation, such as those free radicals. And we're going to be talking even more about where those free radicals come from. Are we eating foods that actually cause that free radical situation to happen? Is the MIND diet mostly focused on just eating a ton of antioxidants, or is it also focused on limiting the foods that cause those free radicals? And I'm going to break that down a little bit later in our presentation. And so the thing about it too, and I know that I mentioned this a little bit earlier on, and you can see on your screen, the brain really doesn't have as many antioxidant enzymes at its disposal compared to other parts of the body. So that is what makes the brain extra sensitive and what makes antioxidants from our diet even more vital to be able to protect our brain overall, and just making sure that we are consistent with that. When we start thinking about the overall just the ingredients of our brain and what our brain is made of, and that brain matter. Our brain matter is 60% fat, aka lipids. Our brain itself is a lot of fluid, but when you take that fluid out, take that water out, when you're left with the tissue that's there, what's left is going to be known as brain matter, and 60% of that is lipid. And so that is going to be the essential structure for our neurons. Our neurons are constantly busy throughout our brain. And in terms of why our brain needs fat, our brain is going to be needing healthy fat to be able to function properly. So this is going to be able to facilitate better blood flow, which means we're getting more oxygen to those cells. Our brain needs oxygen. We want to make sure that that blood flow is consistent. And also too, healthy fat is going to be helping with memory and mood, memory recall. And neurons communicate through a signaling system that gets updated when a new supply of fatty acids are available. So when we think about dietary fat and specific types of dietary fat, this is going to be essential and very important when we think about overall brain health. And so I think that when we think about our brain as the fat brain, it seems silly to say that, but it is true. And when we start thinking about the types of fatty acids, the types of dietary fats that are going to be the most appropriate for our brain, the healthiest for our brain, typically in any kind of literature, you're going to be seeing a lot about DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. That is going to be an omega-3 fatty acid. It's the most metabolically active fat in our brain. And also, as you can see, it's going to be important for cognitive behavior, memory, brain performance. Low levels overall are associated with a greater risk of Alzheimer's and dementia. Also, too, we want to make sure that we acknowledge cholesterol and its role in the brain as well. And that is going to be an essential part of our healthy cell membranes. And it does serve as the raw material for making progesterone, estrogen, cortisol, testosterone, and vitamin D. So those are going to be some important things that we're taking into consideration. Also, too, we do want to acknowledge the fact that there is going to be a difference in types of cholesterol. We're all familiar with our HDL and our LDL, where our LDL is known as that bad cholesterol and HDL, the good cholesterol. And we'll be breaking that down even more as it relates to function with the brain. So as far as cognition goes, when we're thinking about cognition, and I think when we think about it in a general sense, basically, it just breaks down to our ability to think, learn, and remember. It's the basis for how we judge, how we reason, how we concentrate, plan, and organize. And when we start thinking about cognitive decline, I think that there's a very specific way that we want to think about this in relation to the MIND diet and overall. And this is really just going to be describing the loss of cognitive abilities that occur as just part of the normal aging process. Cognitive decline is going to happen for all of us. It's not necessarily going to be just for those that have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia. And that's where there's going to be a differentiation between what's considered mild cognitive impairment, so your Alzheimer's disease and dementia, which are all abnormal conditions. So, we're all going to experience cognitive decline, but then I think a more concerning situation is going to be where you have someone who is recognized to have some mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's disease, or dementia. And again, those are all going to be considered abnormal. So when we start breaking down these abnormal cognitive conditions, first, we're looking at Alzheimer's. And this is going to be a disease that causes a number of nerve cells in the brain to die, commonly marked by memory loss, plus cognitive decline in one or more areas, such as language skills, reasoning, attention, or visual perception. You may have a friend or family member who has experienced this, and have seen these situations firsthand in terms of what that person is experiencing. A little bit differently, we can talk about dementia, which is not necessarily a specific disease, but really a name for a group of symptoms that are caused by disorders that affect the brain. So that does include Alzheimer's and stroke. And most common, the symptom with dementia is going to be memory loss. And then when you think of someone with mild cognitive impairment, this is going to be considered a medical condition that causes people to have more memory problems than other people in their age. So the signs for mild cognitive impairment are not as severe of those of Alzheimer's disease. So I just wanted to briefly mention these, let you know that there are some differences between these conditions, because I think sometimes it can be easy to lump all three of them together, but there are some slight differences. And that's just good for us to know moving forward, especially when it comes to the application of the diet. Okay, before I go into the brain healthy foods, I'm going to take a look at the chat really quick. Okay, so Dale, you actually had a question about intermittent fasting safe or unsafe with respect to preventing or delaying neurodegeneration. So in terms of the neurodegeneration specifically, intermittent fasting, which Miranda, I think we actually need a separate presentation on intermittent fasting because I have some really good stuff on it. So I would say in terms of giving your brain the nutrients that it needs for thriving cognitive impact for the long term, intermittent fasting wouldn't necessarily be a problem, because the hope would be that when you are in your eating window, you're going to be eating foods that are going to be rich in the nutrients that the brain likes, as far as DHA, certain antioxidants such as vitamins A, C, and E, as opposed to the brain just not getting enough glucose. And so I think that whenever we're thinking about our cognitive abilities when we're in that fasting state, we may just not be able to function as sharply as we would if our brain was getting nutrients in that moment during a food situation. I'm going to talk more about that during the Q&A, because I think you bring up a really good question in regards to intermittent fasting. You'll hear a lot of clinicians also call this time-restricted feeding, and there can be some different nuances in terms of how that affects our brain function, also to how that affects blood glucose control, and those all tend to overlap together, and we'll kind of get into that towards the end, because I actually want to dive deeper into that. Okay, so with your brain healthy foods, with the Mind diet, one of the big things that I will mention overall with the Mind diet as we walk into all of this, and I will say that the researchers at Rush and Harvard, when they looked into putting this together, they looked at so many different research studies. They studied several groups of people for several years, looking at quality of diet, cognitive impairment, also having these individuals take tests in terms of cognitive sharpness as well. And so it's nice to know that there is a lot of research that is behind this, and also just making sure that it is something that feels very practical for an individual. It's nice for us to be able to focus on foods that we can add more of to our diet, versus constantly being in a diet mode that promotes, oh, you have to completely eliminate X, Y, or Z. I really like the fact that with the Mind diet, it's giving you a new emphasis on certain fruits and vegetables, certain food groups overall. And we just want to make sure that we are consistent with this. And so I'm going to be going over these brain healthy foods, also going to those brain harming foods, but then we're going to talk more about what that frequency should look like throughout the week of your intake, so that you know how frequently we need to be eating things. Are there certain recommendations for how much we need to limit certain food groups particularly? And so when we start taking a look, first off, with vegetables, big thing is going to be green leafy vegetables and cruciferous vegetables. And if you're not super familiar with cruciferous vegetables, those are going to be things like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. Those are in the cruciferous family. I will say, though, from a GI perspective, that cruciferous vegetables, oftentimes I will have individuals that will mention that if they eat cruciferous vegetables raw, it can be a little bit aggressive on their stomach, just in terms of your stomach breaking down those raw cruciferous vegetables, and the gases that are released from that digestion process being very uncomfortable. And so we have found relief with many individuals eating cruciferous vegetables when they are cooked, even if they're just slightly cooked. That really helps with breaking down those fibers a little bit so that that digestion is a little less aggressive on your GI system. I don't know if any of you experience that. I know that for myself, I cannot eat raw broccoli, but I can definitely eat roasted broccoli in the oven, and that is not a problem, or even slightly steamed broccoli. And so if that's ever happened to you, I'm in the same club. But I did want to share a few things that I wrote down based on some of these vegetables. So when we're taking a look at green leafy vegetables in particular, what's great about this, whether this is spinach or kale or your collards or turnips, these are going to be providing folate, vitamin E, carotenoids, flavonoids, and that those have all been related to lowering the risk of dementia when we have higher intakes of those. When we're taking a look at cruciferous vegetables, one thing that I did find interesting in the research is that when researchers studied more than a decade's worth of diet records from 13,000 older women in search of links to cognitive performance, cognitive decline, and episodic memory, cruciferous vegetables such as broccoli and cauliflower were clear winners for cognitive performance. The group who ate the most cruciferous vegetables performed better at cognitive tests, especially episodic memory. And so even though I am not a fan of the food industry trying to make cauliflower a substitute for everything, whether it is rice or pizza crust or anything else, I'm not in that camp. I can appreciate the health benefits of cauliflower, but as cauliflower, not as a pizza crust or cauliflower rice, but you can mix that in with your regular rice. But anyways, so if you're trying to think of reasons, okay, why should I start eating broccoli? Why should I start eating cauliflower? They are not my favorite vegetable. This can be a great reason to try to incorporate those in there, or even think about a different way to prepare these vegetables. I'm going to be giving some resources for some recipes to try to make this practical. So if your only experience eating cauliflower or broccoli in the past has been from a really gross and sad vegetable medley at some catered lunch, and it just tastes sad and terrible, let's talk about how we can make this over. And also too, in the chat, as we're talking about some of these different foods and food groups, please feel free to share your favorite way to have certain vegetables or the other foods prepared. So as I mentioned, for me with broccoli, I like roasted broccoli or air fried broccoli as opposed to it being raw or even just plainly steamed. I've had roasted cauliflower before that I thought was wonderful and delicious. Some of us in the chat may like cauliflower rice and have found it to be a palatable substitute for doing like a cauliflower fried rice. So if there are certain vegetables on here that we're talking about, I see somebody talking about mixing it with their mashed potato, with mashed cauliflower. I love that. I think in terms of green leafy vegetables, so many of my clients enjoy adding them to smoothies. I see some other folks that enjoy some air fried broccoli. So please, let's keep this conversation going, and let's talk about this, because I think with all of us being in this presentation together, we need to swap ideas. And moving along just with the nutrients, again, with all of these vegetables, and really particularly with those green leafy vegetables, you are going to be finding a high amount of folate, and that's going to promote the production of neurotransmitters. It's also going to reduce homocysteine levels in the body. And what's going to be important in particular with homocysteine levels is that when we think about that connection with folate, inadequate folate levels can lead to high levels of homocysteine. Homocysteine, for those of us that may not be familiar, is actually an amino acid that's in our blood, particularly from eating meat. And so if we do have intensely high levels of homocysteine, these can actually be toxic to our neurons. And so that's where that neurocognitive connection is as it relates to folate. Also, too, these vegetables are going to be high in magnesium. That's going to help dilate those blood vessels. That's going to boost blood flow to the brain. So hello, that means better blood flow to the brain, more oxygen to the brain. That's going to fight oxidative stress. So that's a nice way to really think about these nutrients and those benefits. Okay. Also, whole grains. Whole grains are going to be an excellent source of vitamin E. Vitamin E in particular helps protect our brain. Also, whole grains are going to include the phytochemicals and the antioxidants that really help protect against free radicals. And they are an ideal source of glucose for the brain. And so when we're thinking about whole grains as opposed to like a refined carbohydrate like your white flour or anything else, the reason that this is going to be an ideal source of glucose for the brain is that, yes, it's a carbohydrate, it's going to have glucose there, but there's going to be that fiber content there as well. So it's going to make it a little bit more lower in the glycemic index. That means that that glucose is going to be going into your bloodstream at a little bit more of a pulsated, slow and steady rate throughout the day, as opposed to your body getting glucose from a candy bar where your body breaks that down pretty quickly. We get a quick rush in our blood sugar and then a crash. When we're getting our carbohydrates from whole grains that have that fiber that's still incorporated in, the body has to work a little bit harder to break that down. So that glucose is coming in a little bit more pulsated, which is nice. And so if you're looking at different breads on the market and you're trying to figure out, okay, these breads or this box of cereal says made with whole grains, how do I know what is a marketing ploy as opposed to the fact that, oh, this product really is made with whole grains in the sense that it's high in fiber. For bread in particular, when you're looking at the ingredients are listed in descending order by weight. And so if the first ingredient that you see for a wheat bread says something like stone ground wheat, then you'll know that it's coming from a whole grain flour. There's going to be the fiber that's still incorporated in there. I like to tell a lot of my clients to try to find bread where you're getting at least 2 to 3, if not more, grams of fiber per slice. I know that there are some breads on the market that are listed as a wheat bread, but it still is a refined white flour as one of the ingredients. And it's essentially what I would call a tan white bread. I really enjoy the Nature's Own honey wheat, but I know in my heart that it's not whole grain. But my children love it and it's cost effective. So that is okay. But it's technically not going to be falling into one of the more whole grain breads that is going to have a higher fiber content. So just a little FYI there. If you want to, feel free in the chat to share what your favorite whole grain products are. I know that I've had a lot of clients over the years that when they mention their favorite breads, they mention things like the Dave's Killer bread, Ezekiel bread, other brands that have a very high fiber content. And so, Jackie, with the Nature's Own honey wheat, I know in particular is not technically whole grain, or at least not high in fiber, but I haven't looked at their other varieties of their bread loaves to see if they have some that have a higher fiber content. Because I think that for the Nature's Own honey wheat, and you guys can Google this for me and tell me how much fiber is in it. I'm pretty sure it's less than a gram, if anything, or nothing at all per slice. So take a look at that. But yeah, okay, I see a lot of you guys mentioning Dave's Killer bread. And when we think about this presentation, trying to make sure that all of this information is practical too, you've probably seen the price of Dave's Killer bread in our traditional grocery stores like Publix and Target. Please, in the chat, give me a shout out if you buy your bread from the discount bread store by Mr. Chen's, because that's where my husband and I buy a lot of our a lot of our bread products. Actually, I think a lot of restaurants and food trucks in town actually buy some of their breads from there too, because it is a pretty good price, especially if they're using them for like the grilled cheese and everything else. Okay, so we have some people that shop there. So I'm telling you, there is like anywhere between a $2 to $3, $4 difference with the price that you would pay at Target or Publix versus the discount bread store. It is amazing. So please, please find it. Okay. Nuts. Nuts are also going to be fantastic. The thing about nuts is that just like whole grains, they are going to contain vitamin E, protection for the brain. It's going to reduce oxidative stress and inflammation, and also contain a variety of bioactive compounds, including polyunsaturated fats, phytochemicals, and polyphenols, and also contain folate and fiber. I will say, though, that in my experience working with my patients, sometimes people are a little bit nervous about nuts because they are so high in calorie. They've got that high fat content, they have that high protein content. But what the research is indicating is that those that frequently have nuts as part of their diet, it's actually correlated with a healthier body weight, lower cholesterol levels. Because the thing about nuts, the reason why they are so high in calorie is they have a high fat content and a high protein content. And so they can be a very satisfying component to a snack. When we think about dietary fat, as one of our macronutrients, and why we want dietary fat as part of a meal or snack, aside from just the cognitive benefits, is the fact that dietary fat is the chemical component of a meal or snack that actually makes that meal or snack satisfying to us. So if you just ate a meal or snack and about 30 minutes later, an hour later, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm hungry again. Sometimes it may be the fact that there was not enough dietary fat in that meal. And so nuts can be a really great component to add in addition to something else that you're snacking on. So if you're having an apple, adding some peanut butter with it, or, some almonds or anything else. And I will be emailing or sharing in the chat towards the end of the presentation when you're thinking about your different types of nuts. There's a little bit of a, I guess, ranking of, healthier nuts compared to less healthy, but really overall, they're all going to be very nice and complementary to your diet. Certainly almonds are fantastic, as well as pistachios and some of the other nuts that are there. I know we can mix in some of our cashews because those are pretty delicious too. So I'm going to be adding some of those options in there so you can take a look at those. Okay, beans. Please tell me in the chat if you are a bean lover, and if there's a particular bean that you like, feel free to let us know what it is. Are you a pinto lover? Do you like chickpeas? Do you like to put hummus on everything? What does that look like for you? Because beans are going to be fantastic. They're going to be a really great source of both carbohydrate and protein. And when we're thinking about this from the perspective of brain health, these are going to be high in the plant protein, again, fiber, B vitamins, iron, and potassium. This is nice because beans are going to be a slow and steady source of glucose for the brain, just like those whole grains I was talking about earlier. They're going to be lower on the glycemic index, so they're going to be slower digesting. So they're going to pulsate that glucose to your brain a little bit more slow and steady throughout the day instead of getting a quick rush and then crash. So diets higher in beans have been shown to slow cognitive decline due to their neuroprotective qualities. A really nice source of protein for vegetarians and vegans. There's a lot of creative ways that people tend to incorporate beans. I'll be sharing some recipes related to that in just a little bit. I see coffee beans. Do those count? Not necessarily. Also roasted chickpeas, Jackie, yes, one of my favorites. I love that you guys like lentils and chickpeas. I love a good lentil soup or even just lentils cooked and having that on the side with an additional veggie plate. Edamame, very nice. So you guys have quite the variety in your diet. Okay, berries. The thing that's actually very interesting about the mind diet is that unlike some of the other heart healthy diets that are out there, or even just the dietary guidelines for Americans that will recommend fruit in general, berries in particular are emphasized within the mind diet, particularly because berries compared to other fruits are going to be high in your flavonoids, specifically anthocyanidins, which have the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory functions. you can look, there are so many research articles that talk about the benefits of eating blueberries as well as strawberries. Blueberries you'll often see on so many different types of lists, whether it's something created on social media or actual research articles and evidence-based websites where it talks about blueberries being a superfood. I don't know if you all have family members like I do, but my mom would always say, Sheena, Oprah said that blueberries are a superfood. Did you know this? And I literally had told her about the benefits of blueberries several years before that. I just did not use the trendy term of superfood. But now, because Oprah had said that it was a superfood, of course she's going to start eating them, not because her daughter is a dietitian, but blueberries, whether those are going to be frozen, whether those are fresh, really great source of those flavonoids. And the thing about frozen produce, whether that be fruit or vegetable, and we'll mention this again towards the end when we're talking about practical application, is that with the food industry today, produce is flash frozen at its peak level of nutrition. So it's really going to be protecting those micronutrients that are in there, those vitamins and minerals. So if fresh is not available for a particular produce item that you want, frozen is okay. A-okay. And the thing that we also want to keep in mind whenever we are cooking these various produce items that are recommended in the Mind diet is that vitamins and minerals are very heat and light sensitive. So we have to be careful with not overcooking anything. And actually, when we overcook certain foods, that's what does lead to oxidative stress of some things, particularly frying. And we're going to be talking about that when we start mentioning some of those brain harming foods in actually just a second. So also too, still within the brain healthy foods, we're looking at both poultry and seafood specifically. Red meat is going to be in a separate category of things that we will talk about, but specifically when we're looking at animal proteins, the Mind diet does say that animal proteins can be part of a healthy diet that promotes brain health. And the thing about poultry in particular, it's going to be a great source of B12. It's going to influence mood by increasing serotonin production. Low levels of B12 are often correlated with depression, and we want to avoid frying. And also too, with seafood, we want to avoid frying as well because that high heat, it makes those protein molecules, those protein cells, it makes it denature, it makes it unstable. And that's what causes those free radicals. And also too, when we're thinking about poultry in particular, we're going to want this to be a situation where we're not eating the skin so that we're reducing that saturated fat. And we're trying to emphasize white meat versus dark meat in terms, again, reducing that saturated fat content. And with seafood, that's going to be a great direct source of omega-3, specifically DHA. When we start thinking about the types of seafood in particular that are high in DHA, tuna, mackerel, sardines, all that tasty, yummy stuff, those are going to be very high in your omega-3 fatty acids, specifically DHA. Okay, olive oil. So olive oil boasts over 230 antioxidants and polyphenols, very, very heart healthy. That's why we do see it really emphasized in the Mediterranean diet. Oleocanthal is one of the hundreds of natural phenolic compounds in extra virgin olive oil with antioxidants and anti-inflammatory properties. But many of us probably incorporate olive oil in some way in our eating or cooking. And I think it's really important to just know briefly that the difference between extra virgin olive oil versus regular olive oil. Your extra virgin olive oil is going to be more of what we would call a finishing oil. So we would be using that in our salad dressing. Maybe we're drizzling it over a soup or a crostini with some fresh herbs or anything else. We're really not going to want to necessarily cook with extra virgin olive oil because That heat is going to be killing those polyphenols. It's going to be breaking down those compounds. It's going to be getting rid of that rich olive oil flavor that we want. And so the compounds that are in there in particular, and I actually have it here. So with the polyphenols and the other phytonutrients that are in extra virgin olive oil, the higher those nutrients are in that olive oil, the richer the flavor, which is what drives the price up of certain extra virgin olive oil. So, kind of like the fancy stuff versus the cheaper stuff is the way that it's going to be more concentrated. Now, if you are going to cook with an olive oil, don't use extra virgin, use regular olive oil. But even then, you're not going to want to use a high heat point, mostly because olive oil has a low smoke point. So you're not going to want to use high heat with it. I don't know about you, but I've never heard of anybody deep frying something in olive oil, and that is for a particular reason. And so feel free, again, in the chat, how do you like to use extra virgin olive oil or regular olive oil? Do you cook with olive oil? Do you like to use your extra virgin olive oil as a salad dressing to make your own dressings or to do any other kind of finishing to dishes? Okay, olive oil is great. We've got some conversation there. So again, share how you're incorporating this. Okay, so now with our brain harming foods, I want to make sure that I am being cognizant of our time as we go into this. So with brain harming foods, mostly what I'm going to be emphasizing to you all for each of these different foods is really talking about our frequency of how often we need to limit these foods. Overall, with the brain harming foods, the Mind Diet's five types of brain harming foods are red meat. It's going to be butter and stick margarine, whole fat cheese, pastries and sweets, and fried foods. And we'll be breaking each of those down so I can talk about those frequencies. But really, limiting these foods was part of the diet that led to better cognitive aging and reduced the risk of Alzheimer's and dementia disease in all of the mind studies that have been done related to this diet. And really the commonality among all of these foods is that all of these are foods that are going to increase intake in saturated fat and trans fat in proportion to the unsaturated fat, which leads to the blood brain barrier problems and increases the plaque that's in the brain that ends up affecting our cognitive ability. So really overall, it breaks down to getting too much saturated fat and trans fat. When we talk about the pastries in a minute and sweets overall, a lot of that is also just attributed to the high sugar content and the fact that aside from the sugar and butter and salt that's in pastries, there's not necessarily any additional vitamin and mineral nutrients that are beneficial to us. So at least with red meat, we're getting some other nutrients, like we're getting our iron and our B12 and things of that nature, but we can get those things also from other sources. So we tell people we want to limit that red meat exclusively because of that saturated fat content. So for red meat in particular, it's recommended to limit red meat to fewer than 4 times per week. Some of us may feel like, oh my gosh, like that's super easy because I don't eat red meat every single day. Some of us may be like, oh man, that's a staple meat that my family and I eat every night. So as we're going through these, feel free to mention in the chat if you feel like limiting some of these foods feels pretty easy or not for you. You might think like, oh, red meat, I can go fewer than 4 times per week. That's no problem. My family mostly eats chicken. So feel free to share that with us. Also, too, butter and stick margarine, recommended to limit butter and stick margarine to less than a tablespoon per day. I'll be honest with you, I like my butter. We don't use margarine a lot. We will use to some extent the ones that are olive oil based, but really something about just some real butter on a nice piece of toasted French bread that's like crusty and chewy, fabulous. I don't do it at every single meal, but I do enjoy my butter. So when we think about limiting butter and stick margarine to less than a tablespoon per day, how many of you guys, yeah, right? I wish I was kidding. And again, I'm not saying you have to do this. This is just what's been based on the research studies and the recommendations with this. So take it as you will. So we can have some dialogue with that. And then cheese. So this isn't all cheese, but really particularly, again, talking about whole fat cheese as it relates to the saturated fat content. And this is going to be less than 1 serving per week. Y'all, I don't know about that. And actually, when it comes to the serving sizes, I need to go back and look and tell you guys what that looks like, because I'm going to put in the chat where it breaks down like what would actually be considered a serving. I think it's going to be an ounce is going to be considered a serving. So there's, your low fat cheeses, the other stuff too. But if you're talking about that whole fat cheese, it is recommending to limit to less than 1 serving per week. So take that as you will. Okay, pastries and sweets. Recommended limiting pastries and sweets to fewer than 5 times per week. Honestly, I was really in shock about this recommendation after I saw how hardcore they were on the butter and the cheese. I'm like, I could do fewer than 5 times per week. That's not bad. And again, we essentially want to limit this due to being empty in calorie, high in fat and sugar. And there's just not necessarily any other nutritive beneficial properties. Obviously, we're going to be eating pastries and sweets. There's the benefit in terms of that social or emotional benefit of, hey, this tastes good, or hey, I'm eating this out of celebration. So I'm not saying don't eat it because it doesn't have good vitamins and minerals for you. It's just when we're looking from a mind diet perspective, this is why it's going to be recommending us to limit these, because really other than the fat, sugar, and salt content that's in there, there's not really going to be a lot else that's going on. So honestly, as a dietitian, I was surprised that it said fewer than 5 times per week. So I thought that was interesting. And then fried fast food. So it recommended limiting fried fast food to less than 1 serving per week. And frying dilutes the nutrition in otherwise healthy foods such as poultry, fish, and vegetables. Process of frying can create more free radical potential in foods. So honestly, if I were to tell you like the biggest takeaway to have from this presentation, I would say be mindful of your frequency of fried food. And instead of being in this mindset of, oh, I'm going to limit fried food, I think just kind of switching the way you're thinking about that and saying, I'd like to challenge myself to choose grilled more often or choose other types of cooking techniques. So instead of cognitively and in a very deprivation mindset thinking, oh, I can't eat fried food anymore. And this does not include air frying. So let me put that out there. I feel like air frying is its own neat, wonderful, lovely thing. But we're talking about like deep fried food, regular fried fast food. And again, in the chat, tell me if you feel like this is practical for you, because I would say that based on this recommendation of limiting fried food to less than 1 serving per week, I just hit that this morning with my breakfast. I'm not going to lie. So, because I'm pretty sure that Chick-fil-A fried my hash browns. So I'm just saying, let me know if you feel like that's practical, something that you could see yourself challenging yourself to do. Okay, so practical tips and application. I'm about to be throwing a ton of different things into the chat as far as some links, links to some cookbooks, link to a PDF that lets you know, how many times a day or per week we want to hit certain servings of things. But as far as overall practical tips and making this feel cost effective for you, I think sometimes the biggest concern with individuals that I'm working with is making it feel practical from an economical sense. And so this is where we are going to be, again, utilizing frozen produce because I know that sometimes it can feel a little bit daunting or expensive to buy fresh all the time. If we're a fan of the farmers market, we can get some good deals there. And you all may have seen this meme lately, or maybe have just mentioned it when talking to others. I hear this so many times from my patients, and I feel the same way a lot, is that I think the person that I am at the grocery store with all these good, wonderful intentions, buying all these produce items compared to who I am at home and actually cooking or maybe not cooking, like they're two completely different people. Or maybe you've seen it as the meme where it looks like the person from Tales from the Crypt, and it says, my rotting vegetables in the fridge, judging me for ordering takeout another time this week. Have any of you all, I don't know if any of you all have seen that, but would the links be sent to us after the webinar? Yes, we can make sure, Miranda, I have faith that you have the technology to do that. So I'll make sure that any links that we share in the chat will also be emailed out to you guys too. And I know that this webinar is being recorded as well. So yes. Why do I even buy fresh spinach? Right. Yes, I agree with you, because sometimes it doesn't even make it in my smoothies, which is what I buy it for. Although I do like to wilt some spinach, do it in a pan with a little bit of olive oil and kind of get it wilted down with some fresh garlic, and just lovely. Okay. Also too, buying nuts in bulk, buying both canned and dried beans can make it affordable. Packaged shelf-stable fish from pouches, even buying smaller bottles of the good quality extra virgin olive oil. It keeps it fresher and preserves the polyphenols, so that oil, just as a fat in general, we don't want it to get rancid where it's just there forever. So buying it in smaller bottles, which having multiple bottles there just to keep that freshness. Making black bean brownies. Actually, the book that I used to really do a lot of my research had some recipes. And so they talked about using black beans in a brownie recipe. I've known folks in my life that have done that. I have not done that personally. Let me know in the chat if you have ever made black bean brownies. I hear that they're delicious. Blending leafy greens in smoothies and soups, and even blending silk and soft tofu in smoothies and soups to give it that creamy texture in place of maybe using a high fat dairy, or maybe to add protein to that smoothie. Okay, so I did just want to briefly share one of my favorite recipes. It's not necessarily in the Mind Diet cookbook, but when I started thinking about, oh, we want to have some cruciferous vegetables, oh, we want to have some beans, one of my most favorite recipes, it's from the Thug Kitchen cookbook. I did not take it from there specifically. I was actually at a culinary workshop at UGA several summers ago, and we all had to demo a recipe in front of each other, like the Food Network. And one of the dietitians from South Carolina did this recipe, and it's a roasted chickpea and broccoli burritos. And so it has a diced yellow onion, a diced bell pepper, some broccoli, canned chickpeas. So it's all roasted together. And essentially with the seasonings that you're using, it's going to be some coriander, paprika, cumin. You could easily use a low sodium taco seasoning if you wanted to do that. And so that's all mixed in with some olive oil and some soy sauce. You coat it, you pan roast it, you can roll it up, make it a burrito. If you wanted to do a burrito bowl, maybe put it on a bed of quinoa or some brown rice instead. And then in terms of the fixings, we could do things like avocados. We could add that spinach. So again, more of those green leafy vegetables, do some sriracha or salsa or cilantro. So that one is literally one of my most favorite recipes. And so if you're trying to dabble into doing a meatless Monday and you want to see what this is like, I highly recommend it. And you can let me know personally if you hate it, and I will respect your opinion, but I'm really hoping that you fall in love with it. So really, in terms of take-home points, we just have to remember our brain needs nutrition. It needs both calories and nutrients. So when we think about the brain being hungry, it's going to need that glucose throughout the day, those carbohydrates, those calories overall, but then it is going to need those micronutrients, that vitamin E, vitamin A, C, and E. When we're thinking about antioxidants, it needs all of that from our diet to protect itself from those free radicals, because those are just not going to be as readily available compared to other parts of the body. And so also remembering too, what we eat can affect long-term brain health and cognitive function. And I've had to remind my undergraduate students when I've talked to them about this, is that this style of eating is really a savings plan for their brain, as opposed to a winning lottery ticket. So when I have talked to students about the cognitive benefits of DHA and eating fish and how it helps with memory and academic performance and everything else, I don't want them to take that as, oh, so if I have some sushi the night before a final, that's going to immediately help. It doesn't necessarily work that way. It's going to be more of a long-term savings plan for your brain overall. And I think also too, when I am working with patients as a dietitian, I like to make sure that I'm talking with clients in a way where we're focusing on what can we add to your diet. So when we're making those goals, I don't want those to be goals that say, oh, I don't need to drink soda anymore. I don't need to eat any more fried food. I got to get rid of my sweets. It's more so, oh, I would like to add more water this week. I want to add more vegetables. I want to make sure that I'm actually eating breakfast, because I think when we're thinking about what we're adding more of, by default, we're probably going to be decreasing those other foods, but we're not in that deprivation mindset. And if you're looking for recipe books that would make this feel more applicable, this cookbook is not specifically a mind diet cookbook, but it is definitely in the family of being an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory based cookbook. It was written by Carolyn Williams. Some of you all may know her. She's actually a dietitian in Tuscaloosa. She is on faculty at Shelton. She is a culinary dietitian, and she has this book called Meals That Heal. This is 100 plus everyday anti-inflammatory recipes in 30 minutes or less. Really fantastic. She's a great colleague of mine, actually was a preceptor for me several years ago. She's an Alabama alum, but I think you can get this book on Amazon, and then they sell it at Gourmet Kitchen, the Ace Hardware that's near Blue Plate, and one other place, but I think Amazon has the cheapest price. But she has some really delicious things, like even on the back here, there's a roasted veggie polenta bowl. There's also the strawberry overnight oats with crunch, and then sheet pan fajitas. So just, I don't know. I like beautiful pictures of food. I like feeling inspired. So if you need something like this, I'll put these links, but I'm actually going to go ahead, and if y'all are okay with it, I'm gonna close out. I'm gonna stop the share real quick so that we can go into the chat, and I'm gonna throw some links right here. So this first one that I am throwing in, because I know we're near end of time. So this PDF right here breaks down the foods to eat and then the foods we want to avoid. And it breaks down the frequency of what we're looking for as far as the foods we want to eat, how many times per week or day, and then what actually counts as a serving. Also too, if you were interested in that roasted broccoli and chickpea recipe I was talking about, that was there. This is the one also for, oops, sorry, that link is so long. That one was for the Meals That Heal. And then as far as the mind diet specifically, if you really wanted to geek out over the research with it, as well as have some practical recipes that go along with it, this is another Amazon link from something that I like to use. But okay, so somebody in the Q&A, I'm going to answer this briefly because I just talked way too much. How does avocado oil hold up to olive oil? I've heard it is better for you than olive oil and has a higher smoke point to boot. So avocado oil has become very trendy, and I don't use trendy in a bad word. It just has become more popular, and it can be very appropriate too. It's going to have a slightly different set of it's going to be a monounsaturated fat, and so it's very good. It's the fact that it has a higher smoke point is really nice. It makes it a little bit more practical for folks. Same can be thought of with coconut oil. It is a saturated fat, but also too, it's a medium chain fatty acid. So the thought process is that it more so goes from our gut straight into the liver for metabolism. So it doesn't necessarily get stored as frequently as adipose tissue. So it can often be thought of as healthier as well. So I am not opposed to some individuals using things like the avocado oil or even coconut oil as an alternative cooking mechanism. When we're thinking about the mind diet in particular, they're going to put olive oil as king, just in terms of the amount of phytonutrients in there. I think the thing about olive oil compared to avocado oil is that it is just, the avocado oil is not going to have as many polyphenols as the olive oil does, but still very heart healthy for you. Okay, you guys. So I I'm really grateful for y'all sticking in. I know we're at 1 o'clock. Please feel free to email me any questions at any point in time. For those of you that are still on here, the best email to reach me is nutrition@ua.edu, and I'll actually put that in the chat right now. But I'm here for any questions that you have. I know there was a lot that I probably did not get to address as far as questions that may come up after the presentation, but please know I am a friend on campus. You can always reach out to me. And again, that email is going to be nutrition@ua.edu. So thank y'all so much for your time this afternoon.
I was just going to hop on and say, thanks, Sheena. You did a great job.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I learned a lot.
Oh, good. Thank y'all so much.
All right. Bye, everyone.